we can save this for the future. So, hi, my name is Ari Lewis. Welcome to this week's webinar. As some of you may or may not know, I host a webinar each week on personal branding. So to help people build and scale their personal brands. This week I have Jillian Smith on. So Jillian is a PR professional and is going to talk to us about some of the lessons she's learned from the PR world and how it's helped, with writing and sort of to go and teach everyone, what are some of the lessons she's learned to make you guys better writers and help you guys build and scale your brands through writing. So I'll turn it over to Jillian. We'd love to hear your background and, we could sort of jump into things from there. And before, she goes into that, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to use the Q&A function in the chat, and you can ask questions and we'll get to them and answer them as we move along. So on to you, Jillian.
Cool. Well, first of all, let me start off by thanking all the people who have chosen to attend. The fact that you're even here means that you are taking time out of your day with all the craziness that's going on to learn a little bit more from us. And so I sincerely appreciate that. And thank you, Ari, for giving me the platform to be able to do this. I think we had originally connected over me talking to you about how much I enjoyed your writing and got value from your content. So the fact that you would give me this platform also to talk about that here is really cool. So thank you for that. To get into a little bit more of my background, I am, as Ari mentioned, the Senior Media Relations Specialist at Propeller, which means that I spend the bulk of my day communicating the stories of tech founders and entrepreneurs to publications in the hope of them writing a story about them or getting those founders' thought leadership out into the broader public. I have a deep background in communications, particularly in the tech startup space. I got my start at the Youngstown Business Incubator, right in beautiful Youngstown, Ohio, working to incubate tech startups there, and then moved on to communications work that had a tech focus in Shanghai, China, and Moscow, Russia. But don't worry, I am not a spy, and this Zoom webinar is in no way a clever ploy to get your data for nefarious purposes.
So thanks for that. Actually, before I had a list of questions, I guess, but before we get to that, how are you dealing with quarantine? What are you doing to keep busy? I think that's on top of everyone's mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for asking. It has actually been, for me, I've been so incredibly fortunate. I was able to go back to Youngstown actually to be with my family, just because I wanted to be closer to them while this was all going on. And now that we're in this amazing modern economy where a lot of things, certainly my job can be done remotely, I've been very fortunate that way. So I've actually been very busy cooking a lot for my family. We love to cook and hanging out, talking about politics and economics and all kinds of fun stuff. So I've personally been very fortunate. I know a lot of people have not been so fortunate, but I feel very lucky and blessed to be in the situation I'm in.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So, one of the things in the introduction that I thought was cool is that, you lived in Russia. Can you talk about sort of the experiences you had in Russia, specifically, I guess, with what did Russian audiences look for compared to American audiences? And, what were some of the lessons you learned from that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so that was a very unique and particular project, very niche. So what I was doing there is I was working at the American Chamber of Commerce. And at that time, the US government had just issued a number of restrictions on trade that were related to what Russia was doing that the Americans didn't find particularly attractive. So we were in charge of communicating those new developments that the Treasury Department was rolling out and telling businesses, particularly ones who touched on industries that were affected by the sanctions. So that was things like banking in particular, some energy industries. But then we wanted to look more broadly at how this could impact the business community as a whole. And we serviced, in particular, American businesses who were operating in Russia. So we wanted them to have a sense of what to prepare for, what to know about, and how they could kind of steel themselves for what was to come, which is actually kind of funny because that was my very first experience in like crisis management. And it has become even more valuable now, I think. So the audience is there, and I think this is something that's valuable for anyone, particularly going through times of crisis, is that they didn't have time to sit through and listen to you pontificate about a particular issue or topic. They wanted real actionable advice right now about what they could get done, so that they could do it and then move on with their day. They were very nervous, and there was a lot of misinformation and a lot of rumor. And so people were just really trying to look for a credible voice that was delivering consistently and delivering concisely. And I think that's what we did a really good job of at the Chamber, was just providing that steady, concise voice to those people.
So, a few things you mentioned that I'd love to sort of follow up on. I think one is, you talked about in your writing, having fluff versus, more actionable, direct things. So I think one of the things about the best writers is that they remove all the fluff and they're focused on adding value to the audience, giving direct but important stories. And I think this is both in nonfiction writing, fiction writing, but also in professional business case writing as well.
Mm-hmm.
How do you determine, this is important, this is fluff, where do you draw the line? Can you sort of touch on that and some of the things you find
Absolutely.
those narratives?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say that in startup marketing in particular, we come across this quite a bit, just because there's so much that have become these like industry jargon kind of standards, like disruptive or world-class or industry moving. And it's like, what does all of that even mean? Like, why are you saying that? And so what we really try to do, particularly in our press releases, which are notorious for having fluff in them, is we try to think about what is the problem and how is that problem being solved. So I'll put this into two parts. If you are writing in a business context, you're always going to want to be thinking about what are the individual problems that your readers are having, and then what is the solution that you can get to right away to solve that problem. So an example is we have a client who specializes in distributing microloans to students, because students are often underserved by traditional lenders. And so in the press release, what we did, instead of saying, this is a disruptive technology that's going to drive the industry forward, we said our client X is launching a platform to service students that are traditionally underserved by larger credit entities. And what that does is it communicates exactly right then, okay, this is the problem. Students are discriminated against in a typical lending process. Here's the solution, this company. And so I would say if you are reading a press release or any kind of writing really, and there are too many words, descriptors, adjectives, adverbs that cut between or that go between the question and the answer, or the problem and the solution, you have to think about cutting. And it's difficult to cut. That's why there's like that famous anecdote. I think it was Abraham Lincoln. He said, I wanted to write you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so here's a long one. And I think that's very true. It takes a lot of effort to distill down what you want to say into its basic components. For press releases in particular, what we always like to do is put it into the who, what, when, why, and how. And I think that in all kinds of writing, this is something that is important to keep in mind. Say you're writing a blog post, you want to inform your customers about a particular, I don't know, how to save for college. We'll just go back to that example from that previous company. You want to make sure that you are framing the narrative of who, so college students, what need to save, why, because it's a problem that's going to follow them for the rest of their lives if they don't. How, here's 3 steps. And I think that when you think about that format, and when you think about how your customers or your readers or your audience are discovering what you have to say and scanning it quickly, that's the best format for getting your information across.
Yeah, I love that formula. It's very simple, and I think that's definitely a good framework for people to use. You know, it's funny when you talked about that Abraham Lincoln quote. You know, for me, my writing has sort of evolved from when I was in school. It was about, oh, I had to hit, make sure it's 1,000 words, make sure it's 2,000 words. And now that I've written in a professional setting and I write for others, it's not about like, I'm trying to hit 10,000 words or 5,000 words or whatever arbitrary word limit. It's about, did I, add value to my readers? And it's such a different framework and lens to think about. I think, specifically for younger people in the chat, maybe even, old people as they get older also have this problem. How do you sort of change in that mindset from, school and the way you were taught to write was about like hitting these arbitrary word limits. And quite honestly, I think also that fluff, they wanted you, oh, you got to put in these adjectives and add all this. And you probably added that fluff to try to boost that word count. But how did you evolve from, I wrote like this in college and high school because I was told to write like this, to, okay, I have to add value. I have to make sure I'm getting the point across in a quick, succinct way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a great question. I love that question because I think it's an evolution that all younger professionals have to go through, because I think a lot of us feel pressure to sound very educated and well-read so that we're taken seriously. Whereas in reality, a very busy editor, for instance, we once talked to a reporter at the Next Web, which is a tech publication, and he said, on a quiet day, I probably get about 400 emails. That are just PR pitches, people like me pitching him an idea. And so these people don't have time to read through all of your verbosity and your fluff, like you're saying. They just need to get the information. And what really helped me with this was 2 things. One is thinking about writing like electricity. And so what I mean by that is even a potato can generate electricity. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be this really amazing complex machine. You just have to get the one little stick on the other little stick and get the current going through that's from the potato. I haven't done that experiment since like the 7th grade, so my vocabulary is a little off, but the idea is that writing, the best writing, communicates simply. It gets the ideas that are in this brain over to that brain. And if a potato can do that with a couple of electrons, you can do that with your writing. I used to tutor a girl in college in writing, and she was very articulate, very well-spoken, a great student, but every time she brought me one of her papers, I dreaded it. It was an exhausting process. And it's because she just burdened her papers with so much, therefore, and the synergies of this aspect, and these phrases that they sounded very impressive, but they really took away from the experience of actually consuming the information and then retaining the information. So that's the first part, is I would recommend thinking of writing like a potato. And the more efficiently you can just deliver those electrons, that's what matters. It doesn't matter whether you have you don't need a Tesla battery to generate that electricity, just whatever works. And the second thing is the more you read, I think, the better you become at condensing that language, because you just become a user experience expert. I know that and I think you and I were even talking about this at one point, when I go to search for information, there's so much out there, so much. I'm going to engage with the content that delivers me what I want to know in the quickest amount of time. Yes, I want it to be done in a way that is well organized, well thought out, but it doesn't need to be at a level much higher than a fifth grader. And even Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain something to a 4-year-old, you don't understand it well enough yourself. So I think there's a real art to actually taking away some of that pressure we put on ourselves to sound very smart and take ourselves very seriously. I think a lot of young people will find they're taken more seriously if they can crystallize their ideas down into very simple, basic concepts.
Yeah, that's really, great explanation. One of the things that I wrote down, well, I wrote a couple of things down, but I guess two then that I wanted to touch on is one for me personally. When I think about writing, I always think about framing things in threes. Like, as we write this whole essay and we think everyone's going to love it and it's amazing, but most people just remember like 3 things. What are those 3 points you're going to get across? So I'm always thinking, hey, here are the 3 things I want to convey to the audience that I hope they remember and take away from this.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that I wrote down is, you talked about the next web and that 400, pitches they get a day. And I think, to make that a more broader question, one of the things that reporters care about is credibility. So who's telling them that? And,
Mm-hmm.
if we think about our work and distributing it to a larger audience, how do you recommend people that they're starting out and they have, imposter syndrome, they're afraid to write. And I think part of that also comes down to distribution of they see these people, these influencers, and like, oh, they have 1 million followers. Like, I'll never get there. How do you get them? How do you get people to overcome that first step and, getting them to start writing and encouraging them to write those blog posts, but also for them to understand that, if you consistently write, you'll get to the point of credibility where, someone like the next web or your audience or whoever it is, they'll always click on that email and open it because they know that whatever you write adds value to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also a good question, because we find this even with our startup founders. Some of these people are absolutely brilliant, have created these incredible technologies, and yet they still think, oh, I'm not a thought leader. I don't have anything to say. I don't want to put anything out there. And what people don't realize is that just the first step of even saying anything at all is a step, and it's an important one. So I'll break this down also into 3 parts. The first part is just doing it. And what I love here is there's this book by Anne Lamott. It's called Bird by Bird. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's
Yes.
Probably required reading for a lot of people.
I preach it all the time. By the way,
really?
First person I ever heard recommend that book.
Oh my gosh.
For those in the chat, Bird by Bird is a book that I had to read for AP English. And all I go around is people say, I forget the expression now. It's was it day by day or something like that. I never say that. I say bird by bird because
you say bird by bird.
In the book, one of the anecdotes that is told is the author Anne Lamott has to do a writing project and has to detail a list of birds, and she's overwhelmed with all the birds she has to talk about. So her father tells her, just take it bird by bird.
Exactly.
Name is day by day, but we digress, and I'll turn it over to you. But for everyone in the chat, that's one of the best, if not the best book on writing, and I'll put it in the chat, the Amazon link.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's absolutely, I think if resources for writing, like just reading that book is one of the first things that you can do to get started. I think it's really good motivation. But anyway, so the quote in that book, just take it bird by bird, that's really what we encourage a lot of our founders to do. Instead of thinking, oh, I have to build this whole massive thought leadership strategy, I'm going to start much simpler. I'm going to start by tweeting one interesting thing every day. I'm going to start by sharing one interesting LinkedIn article every day. And by doing this, you're gradually building up a following that shows what you're thinking about, what you care about. And the great thing about Twitter is that anybody who you want to really be in contact with is just a tweet away. And so that's one of the wonderful things about living in the time that we do, is that, yes, maybe somebody from the next web is inundated with 400 pitches, but if you tag him on Twitter, odds are he's probably going to see that tweet. And what we love to do also in PR is this idea of relationship building. And this is, so I'm a little bit digressing from my original point, but Twitter is very important for first, just getting used to a regular cadence of saying something, creating something, but it's also a great relationship builder too. Anyway, so the second idea in terms of starting is, if you're comfortable with just that cadence of having something to say every day, having some thought or idea that you put out into the universe, take it a little bit bigger. Think about, I'm going to think of one headline a day that I could write about, one thing that I find interesting, and then go beyond that. I'm going to put one outline together of a piece. I'm going to think about the headline, I'm going to think about the subheadlines, and I'm going to think about the conclusion, and just do that for a while. That helps you organize your thought process and your ideas. And once you've done this a number of times, moving from baby step to bigger step to bigger step, you start really thinking about having a writing hat on the whole time, and taking every situation that comes to you as an opportunity to explore further for writing. We have a blog, or we have a Slack channel at my office where anything interesting that happens in our workflow, say a client comes across an interesting issue, somebody solves a problem that the rest of us have been having, we throw it in this Slack channel called Blog Ideas. And it's just this, it's been amassing all of these different ideas because all of the people in my office who are great, they've started approaching life with this writing hat on, like, oh, this is an interesting idea, this is something we could explore further. And there's actually a great comedian, he was leading like one of these web master classes, like how to be funnier, and he said, you know, the thing that I do the most is I notice everything. I notice the world around me. And he, in particular, he talked about how he was in Paris, and the assumption in Paris is that nobody there speaks English, right? But the funny thing about Paris is that there's a bunch of tourists in Paris who do speak English. And so he was standing next to this couple, and this woman had an absolutely hideous handbag, and he was staring at it and judging it. And so the husband leans over to his wife and says, honey, be careful, there's a lot of pickpocketers here. But he didn't whisper it, he didn't say it quietly, because he figured nobody here speaks English. But it was a moment that this comedian, he thought that he was just being a judgmental asshole, basically, but he was actually being mistaken as a French pickpocketer. And for him, it was just this really funny moment that he was present for, and he noticed it, and he went back later and he created this whole stand-up bit around it that became super successful. And I think the same applies to writing. The more that you take these small steps, the more you become habitualized to think about ideas for writing and the meat of your writing, and you'll be more surprised. You have more to talk about than you think.
Yeah, no, I really love that story. And, you know, I read a lot about habits for those of you who want a good resource for that. James Clear, who I don't know if you read Jillian, but is a great writer who talks about habit building. And I think, people think they have to write the great American novel when they start writing, but, it just starts with, maybe you start with Twitter and your goal is, they doubled it, right? It's 280 characters is the limit now, but, once a day, I'm going to write 280 characters that adds value to, my 5 followers, 10 followers, and just build that out slowly but surely. You'll get more confident. 280 characters maybe turns into a short blog post, then that turns into a book, and that turns into, whatever. But start small. You don't have to climb the mountain immediately. You just take the first step. But I wanted to go to the chat. So someone asked the question. You gave that great metaphor about the potato generating electricity approach to writing.
Uh-huh.
Can you talk about that approach, and sort of if you frame it from the business writing approach and the creative writing approach, sort of what are the similarities in that approach when you with business and creative writing, and what are the differences?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I do think I'm a little bit biased because I come from more of a business writing perspective. And so I think that it's more effective of an analogy in that context. But I'll bifurcate and I'll talk about both. So in business writing, again, people want their problems to be solved. They are looking for quick solutions to their answers. And so I guess what in my mind I think about is, if you have just a potato and it is sitting there, it's not doing much. It takes the act of creating that transmission to be effective. But it only can be done with a particular material that reduces friction. What you want to do is reduce the amount of friction that you have between your idea and the person consuming your idea. And this is really important for business writing because in a 5 to 7 second window, a person reading your content is going to have formed an opinion on whether or not they want to engage with you further. And with creative writing, it's a little bit different. The potato analogy, I would say, still applies, but in a different way. So Anne Lamott, she also has a great piece of advice for writers, and that is give yourself permission to write really shitty first drafts. And I think that for creative writers, that is important because you have all these ideas, you have all this stuff in your brain, these plot lines, these characters, things that are really complex and interesting. But to just even get them all down on paper is a scary process because writing reveals who we are in a way. And when you get it out there and it doesn't look how you want, it can start giving you thoughts about, who am I as a person? What am I doing? What kind of a sick person is creating this content? What's wrong with you? But Anne Lamott in her book, she talks about, look, give yourself permission to do it. Make it. It can be an ugly baby. It's kind of like a minimum lovable product in the tech world. It's you want to get something that is, or Tammy Duckworth. She had a great quote. She spoke at a women's tech conference the other day. She said that in the military, they always went with the 80% solution because if you try too hard to get things perfect, you're going to be inactive. You're not going to take any action that's going to lead to a result. And so her and her team would always go with, well, what's 80% effective? And then go from there. With creative writing, you have the ability to start with that potato or that shitty draft or that 80% solution and take a break from it. You start, you take a break, you refine, you edit. And that's the other great thing about creative writing too, is there are no rules. Nobody is telling you what you can and can't do. You won't be punished for changing an idea or coming up with a different way to tell what you're telling. Maybe in your mind, you think that somehow that's going to happen, that you'll be exposed for the fraud that you are if it doesn't all come out perfectly at the first get-go. But that's a beautiful thing about writing, is that you're improving on ideas and you are taking additional information to refine what you have, and it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful. One of the quotes that I always say is, perfection is the enemy of action, and
Mm,
that sums up what you're really trying to convey. One of the things I wanted to also touch on was social media writing. So, we talked a bit about Twitter. I don't think we talked really about LinkedIn. What are the tips you have for people? So I think many people in the chat, when they think about writing, they're like, I'm gonna write a blog post, I'm gonna write an email for a client, I'm gonna, write for fun. But writing a tweet is writing.
mm,
Writing a status on LinkedIn is writing. For clients, or what are some of the lessons you've learned that you think are important to help everyday people when they're trying to compose that tweet, or compose that LinkedIn status? What are some of the things that are similar to some of the writing that we talked about? Well, what are the things that are different that we haven't touched on?
yeah. That's a two-part question. So the first part is you really want to condense the why into as few words as possible. How can you draw that person in? Because the tweet or the LinkedIn post is meant to really be a call to action in some way, whether it's to engage with you further, whether it's to read something that you're putting out there. It's some kind of way to get people to do something else. Very rarely is it the end in itself. And so when you're doing that, you need to think about, how can I communicate this information that makes them want to do the next step in as few words as possible? Because as soon as you make people read too much or think too hard about something, we're endless scrollers. There is an endless amount of information for people to consume and to digest, and if there's friction there, they're going to move on. So that's one, and that is a general rule for things that you are just putting out for promotional purposes. But there's a second rule, and that is for meaningful community on Twitter, or LinkedIn or wherever. That's not always going to work, because I think it's Andy Crestodona. He's a great marketer over at Orbitz Marketing here in Chicago. He has this rule that your social media strategy should be about 50-60% promotion, talking about what you're doing, and then maybe 50% promotion, 20% like commenting on interesting things, sharing other people's work and their insights. And then the final bit is engaging community yourself. So that engaging community yourself part is you don't want to condense information, you want to start conversation. And so thinking about how unique is it that we have these platforms right now where you can create conversation with essentially anybody you want who is interested in that idea or that topic, and then spurring that conversation. So what we like to do at Propeller, again, is follow people. We have Twitter, what do you call those, alert notifications, so that just if anybody who we think is interesting is putting something out, we follow it. We look into what they're talking about, and that helps us get more ideas for how to engage those people. Because you'll see over time, people have patterns. People are interested in certain things, interested in certain ideas. And if you can get them to be interested in your idea by linking your idea with what they're interested in, you can create a great connection. You can create conversation, and that can bring other people in, and it can spur debate, spur interesting ideas to come forward. So yeah, I think that it's really neat as a platform. We haven't had a time, I don't think, in history where people have been this accessible, and I think that the people who conquer that that ability to leverage not only Twitter and LinkedIn and social media for promotional purposes, but also for community building, are the ones who win.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about community. So social media, I think a lot of people sort of aren't using it enough. I always encourage people to use social media more. I think, building a following helps build distribution, which obviously, exponentially increases the amount of people that read your writing. So, I guess on the community front, one of the things that I want to talk about is, how do you know your writing has, resonated with an audience? What are sort of those steps that you recommend for people to go like, oh, this person, likes this. I think, as someone who writes a newsletter, and who writes frequently, one of the things that is kind of surprising that I never realized was, and this is before I started writing, is that, a lot of people can open something and you never hear from them. You know,
Mm,
one newsletter I send out, and sending out for like a year and a half, and I get maybe once a week I hear from someone, but the open rates have been above, what industry averages would want them to be, and the newsletter does well, but it's just, I don't hear from people. I don't know, like, do they like this? Do they not like this? So how do you sort of, recommend for folks, oh, this resonated with someone? Do you rely on the analytics? Do you rely on, I have to have individual conversations with people and find out, and also that biases of, I think a lot of people will go to like their family and friends and ask for something.
mm.
But I think about my content, my family and friends shouldn't be reading the content I put out. I don't think it's relevant to them at all. So like, I could care less about their opinion on some of the subjects I write about. So how do you sort of, think about those things, and create a framework for that? And I know that was a lot, so happy to you know, what's the word? Happy to rephrase the question. There we go. Happy to rephrase the question if need be.
Yeah. So I think that's also, you have to think about it in a business context and then in like a personal context. Because with business, I would say it's much easier, because there are things that, for example, at Propeller, we know when particular content has resonated, because we will see inbound leads being generated from our content. For example, one of our clients will say, "Oh yeah, we got this great lead from this article that you guys put out. They saw, our thought leadership there, and thought that we knew our stuff. We knew what we were talking about. So they decided to go with us as a vendor." And so that's always very validating for us, because that's ultimately what we want to do, is we want to make our clients as successful as possible, and that's the end goal. With personal writing, it's a little bit more unique, and actually I think you're somebody who does a good job of this, is just taking those different platforms, growing them individually, but also blending them, creating synergy between them, I guess. Like how I even became connected with you, for example, is I read your newsletter, and then at the bottom there was like an example to reach out to you through Gmail or on Twitter, and a lot of companies do that, but I think there's a difference in how you present it. As are you doing it, as just this boilerplate, this is what we're going to do, or are you doing it to establish a personal connection? And I think people, their BS meter is pretty high, and they can sense that. And so if you do a good job of creating those points of engagement in an authentic way, and you're seeing engagement on it, that's good. It's that old adage is like, no news is good news. I think a lot more people read and consume our things, our content that we put out, than we realize. But they don't do anything about it just because they're busy. They've consumed it. They're going about their day, or maybe they're even shy. They don't know what to say. But the fact that if you do have those engagement points, and they're communicated authentically, and you have synergy between your different points of engagement and your different platforms, and you're seeing engagement on those, I'd say that's a pretty good indication that you're resonating.
So, I wanted to jump in and say that we have about 5 minutes left. So if you guys have any questions, just let us know. I've been really trying to keep these to less than 45 minutes, because I think that it's a sort of a good time, and we don't want to keep rambling on and on. Um, but you know, I think one of the last questions I had was, so what resources have been really helpful in building your writing career, and you mentioned Bird by Bird. What else has been good, whether it's books, articles, but also your network, has that played a big part in your writing? uh,
Hmm.
and then also for folks out there, is it just writing itself? I think some people are like, I read this and go, wow, they're such a good writer. And then, you go back and you read their first draft. If they, been writing for a while, and you're like, oh, wow, they just, wrote more over time. So, would love to hear from you on that.
Totally. Yeah. The first thing I would say, and it sounds like very general and maybe like something you'd hear from your sixth grade teacher, but good readers are good writers. And so I think that is one of the things that has helped me by far the most, is just reading very prodigiously. No, what's the word I'm trying to go for? Not prodigiously, profusely. Anyway, so reading a lot, and all different genres, all different kinds. Right now, because I'm in public relations, I read the news more than anything else, I would say. But whatever your particular area of interest is, I think it's okay to draw inspiration from any genre. And because good language, good communication spans different types of genres. And so one is just reading out front, just any kind of reading that you could do. But going beyond that, there's some particular blogs that I really like. One is called Grammar Party, and they have like tactical advice on how to structure things, and like different questions that I've often had. They have good answers that don't require a English degree to get through. But the other thing they do is they also go into like strategy too. So they do the tactics and the strategy, the what and the why. One that I just discovered is called Yeah Right Club, and it has just like these writing practitioners kind of giving their in the trenches perspective on their writing best practices. So I've enjoyed that one. One that my
Okay,
colleague,
what was that? What was the last one? I just want to put it in the
oh
chat.
yeah, Yeah Right Club, but right is like WRITE.
You'll have to send me the URL. By the way, everyone, I'm gonna write I usually write a follow-up piece. So in that follow-up piece, I'll include the URLs, which you can check out. If we missed one here, I'll make sure I have it in the the, the follow-up piece. So didn't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to put
No,
that
you're
in.
good. Yeah, and actually that one in particular, it's written by this woman named Kaylee Moore, and she's somebody who I think has a rockin' Twitter presence. She's just so good at giving small actionable insights, driving conversation, driving thought leadership. So yeah, go to Yeah Write Me, but then also check her out on Twitter, because I think she does a great job. Um,
So thanks for that. We got some more from the chat now. So couple questions. So question one is, how do you balance the concept of your own personal voice and the content you craft for your place of business or a corporate entity? How do you stay creative and shape that voice, besides writing outside of work? This person who's asking the question says that writing, for work sometimes diminishes her personal, or her, don't know who it is, personal creative voice. So
mm,
what are your thoughts there, recommendations there?
mhm. Yeah. So I don't know if this is normal or just something very strange that I do. But I like to think of writing in the voice of my clients as kind of a practice in acting, in theater, because I'm putting on the hat of whoever I am writing for. And so it's kind of fun to employ just that side of your creativity. It's not the same, of course, as being very clever with your words or very elegant with your phrasing, but it's a different kind of creativity where you are writing. It's almost as though you're writing for a character in a novel, and which is a form of creative writing, but it's you writing in the voice of somebody who is not yourself, but thinking about what their motivations are, what their experiences are, and then who they're talking to try to get what they want. I did acting classes back in college, and one of the things they talk about was the Stanislavski method, which is all about finding people's different agendas, finding their motivations. Why are they doing things? And for me, that really helps drive writing for clients and establishing a voice for them, because I'm thinking about not only what are the motivations of my client, why do they want to write this, but then what are the motivations of the people who are reading it as well. And so for me, it's kind of like taking either method acting or writing for a character voice and employing it in the context of let's use this to generate sales.
Yeah, I really like that answer. So, I guess on that note, and it's relevant to our next question, one of the audience members asks, in writing for a particular group, in this person's case, it's small businesses. What advice do you have for targeting that market? And I think to also make that question more broader, if someone's trying to write towards a particular audience where you're trying to attract them as clients or whatnot, how do you frame that writing to hit that target audience? How do you work on that?
Yeah, that's a question I think a lot of people struggle with a lot. In particular, when it comes to writing, I think that there are two things. The first is I love platforms like Quora and Reddit, because these are anonymized platforms that allow people to ask questions that they would be too afraid to ask not from behind a screen. At conferences, everybody says, oh, do you have any questions? Nobody wants to raise their hand because they don't want to be the guy that admits that they don't know something. But on these platforms, people are asking their raw questions, and they're saying things that, they really want to know, that they're really curious about. And so for me, when you go onto those platforms and you're looking at the kinds of questions that people are asking that are related to your business or related to your target market, you can find a goldmine of information there for like what people really want to know, what they're asking. And so then when you use those to formulate the arguments or the structures of your pieces, then you know that you're resonating with at least somebody, because somebody out there is asking the question. And so that's the first part. But the second part, I think, is, and just to go back to that really quickly, Twitter is also really great for that. I love Twitter, but it's because you can separate a lot of conversations according to industry. So, there's a writing Twitter, there's a med Twitter, there's a retail Twitter, and everybody has these different experts who weigh in these different, you can customize it according to however you want, and you can see a lot of different conversations that are happening there and write according to those. So then the second question is, look at what's already out there. There's a lot of good stuff. If it wasn't good, people wouldn't be making any money. People are doing good work. There is a lot of fluff, there's a lot of bad stuff, but there's also a lot of really good stuff. And there's no reason people have to reinvent the wheel. It's as long as it's good enough to be something that is adding new valuable information to the conversation. That's why there's only, what is that one song, Pachelbel Symphony, that all those other different musicians have riffed on. It's variations on a theme, basically. There's, you're making a face at what?
I don't know. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, yeah. What does it even sound like? I can't even remember.
Someone wrote it. Canon in D.
That's it. Yeah.
Pachelbel's canon, yeah.
Randall. Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Um,
Randall Madeline, yes.
and Madeline, yes, thank you. So yeah, it's this idea of variations on a theme. There's a lot of great content out there that people are already writing, probably related to your target market or your target business. And all you have to do is improve on it just a little bit, add your own perspective, which is going to be unique because you're a unique person and you have a unique perspective. And so, yeah, those are the two answers I would give.
Well, Jillian, thanks so much for joining us today, and thank you everyone who's in attendance. As I mentioned, I do this every Wednesday. Next week, I'm going to have on Dave Loomis, who is the former CMO of Dixon Eden, and talking about helping find your voice. And then each week, Tuesday or Monday night and Wednesday night. So today I send out an email about personal branding. So my email today is about the invention of the penny press and fake news. So look out for that. And if you have any questions, feel free to tweet at me or email me, and happy to respond. And if you're looking to get connected to Jillian, actually, Jillian, maybe you could type in your email in the chat so that
Totally.
people have it.
And can I also put in a resource that I forgot
Yeah,
to
feel
mention
free
that
to.
I think is
And I'll make sure to put that resource up. You sent it to me, but I will put it in the chat. All good. And then I'll also make sure that when I write the follow-up piece to include that resource as well.
cool.
I was include. Did you post the resource? I didn't see it.
No, but it's just gonna be so like Propeller, we have an amazing content team and I steal a lot of my ideas from them. But they have a blog that talks all about how to write great content, even DIY PR, because if you are, not at a certain stage in your company, there's a lot that you can do yourself, and there's a lot that you should do yourself, and that you don't need to hire a firm for. And we have a lot of great information on that. So that is something I would recommend folks check out.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone so much for joining. And I guess to end it on that note, yeah, quality of writing is important, but distribution is just as important as well. So I would definitely recommend checking that out, because if you write great but you don't know how to market yourself, who's going to read it? So thanks so much, and looking forward to everyone who joins me next Wednesday. Have a good one. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.